I awoke in the night to give it suck. It appeared to be sleeping so quietly that I would not awake it. It was dead then, but we did not find that out till morning. From its appearance, it evidently died of convulsions. Will you come? You are so calm a creature, and Shelley is afraid of a fever from the milk, for I am no longer a mother now. She reconceived a few months later and gave birth the following spring, and it was that summer that she and Percy and Claire went to Lake Geneva to visit Lord Byron, and Mary conceived of Frankenstein, as well as a series of travel logs about their journey through France and Italy. In the weeks before we moved to Montana, where I'd taken a job teaching writing, I packed up the apartment while my husband was at work. That summer, the heat never broke. We'd finally found an air conditioner to put up in the bedroom, but the rest of the apartment was dusty and hot. In between packing boxes, I often took breaks and stood by the window to look out on the street where we'd lived for 1 year. That year, it had been a happy time in my life. The apartment was infested with mice, but it had large bay windows facing out to the street. They were flooded with sunlight in the afternoon, full of gently stirring sycamore leaves, so that at certain hours of the day, the shadows of the leaves played across pools of light on the walls in a way that made it seem as if we lived underwater. It's true that it was a grim time in the country at large. Every day, it seemed there was a new mass shooting. Every month, a Muslim ban was instated or overturned. And meanwhile, it was clear that the weather was changing. That fall was so warm, the leaves on the ginkgo trees didn't change. They clung greenly on all through October and November until one night in December we had a rainstorm. The next morning, the gutters were clogged with little green fans. By then, the forest fires in California were already burning. They were, at that time, the worst fires in California's history. The flames raged behind my parents' house and crept down the side of the mountain where they lived, and a firefighter died on their street, trying to keep the blaze from consuming the houses. In January, my parents were evacuated. They gathered the dog and their most important possessions and moved to a place called the Seashell Motel. When they finally returned to their house, a heavy rain fell, and because there were no longer any trees to hold down the dirt on the mountain, mudslides began gathering strength, running through their neighborhood, and eventually tearing away most of the houses that remained on their street. For some reason, however, their house remained standing, so that if they had not evacuated once again to the Seashell Motel, they could have sat by the large windows in their living room, facing the road, watching cars float by, and then houses, which is what their neighbors, a widowed man and his 2 children, did from the roof. They lived a bit farther down the hill, and for some reason that part of the street was not given an evacuation order. So when water began to rise in their house, they climbed up to the roof and remained there, holding one another, until one of the children, the daughter, was swept away and never recovered. Sometimes, during that happy winter, I spoke to my mother on the phone. In general, she was remarkably cheerful, though her street was now lined with the empty concrete holes of what used to be basements. When they received their 3rd evacuation order, however, she told me she was considering resisting it. Sometimes, she said, you just want to stay where you are and watch the rain wash it all away. I listened, sort of, but I was so happy. I lived in a sunny apartment with a man I'd fallen in love with. I'd wound my life back together again after the years when it had come unraveled. I was so happy, I couldn't even read novels, with all their obsessing over the minutiae of suffering. Instead, I read children's books by Tove Jansson. Sometimes, from California, my mother sent me articles about global warming.